Hi, I'm Prox, I'm the guy who made Dynacore, a free roguelike you can play right now. I'm making this video to sort of share my experiences with development and release and so on. I took down some notes and I will just be rambling about the game for a while. The first time I recorded this, the recording ended up being over an hour long and I'm not editing that, so I'll be a bit more brief this time. With that being said, I hope you'll be able to learn from my mistakes or at the very least find them entertaining. Yeah, this story starts as a lot of things do in school. I got an assignment in IT class to make anything computer related, so of course I went ahead and started a game. I wanted to make something more demanding, so I picked Roguelike because at the time I was playing a lot of different roguelikes. I was playing a lot of Binding of Isaac, Spelunky. I put an ungodly amount of time on those and I kind of wanted to make my own take on that, my own take on the brutal roguelike, which will take you hundreds of hours to master. A very specific niche. But I thought it would resonate with some people, so I went ahead and made my first prototype, and most of the development process was pretty streamlined. It was more programmatically complicated than anything I've done before, but there weren't really any issues I couldn't get over in like a couple of weeks. So progress was pretty steady. I did take some breaks, but I tried to do something every day, so kind of tried to turn it into a habit. John from Lost Relic Games did a pretty good video on this. I think it was called No 0 Days or something. Because one of the biggest killers of long-term projects is putting a project down, and when you come back to work on it again, you just cannot find your way around in your horrible mess of code, which you haven't commented. And of course it's also harder to lose motivation if you just keep at it. So that's like one of the main reasons I stayed motivated, which at the time I found very, very surprising, because my longest project before that was The Right Turn, which only took me like 2 months, but after that I was completely burnt out and I couldn't continue any further. But that also had to do with how horribly that game was coded. It was truly a sin, a crime against God. So I kind of tried to build this framework from which I could easily add new level layouts or guns, so I wouldn't have to write a bunch of code just to add a single sword or something, which is common practice. But before that I only really had experience from game jam games where you always take the path of least resistance and pay for it later. But with games like these, if your like basic systems aren't working and you have to constantly work around them and redo them, your game just won't get finished. That being said, I still had to rework Dungeon Generation like 3 times before it worked. And of course, with how long the code was, sometimes I would just break things and not even notice, because they weren't really all that significant and in the grand scheme of things. So I would like implement a pretty, I would say, significant mechanic, and later on I would just find a code snippet and like, oh, this wasn't working for the last 6 months. And I barely had time to playtest. I really only tested the things I was working on at the moment, and I never really went ahead and played the game from start to finish, because with these kinds of games, a single run can take you half an hour. So the first time, or each time I playtested the game, like as a full experience, it didn't even feel like my own game. I know what it felt to shoot an enemy, I know what it felt to pick up an item, but how all these things play together, I never really took that into account. In the end it did end up working out, but I definitely should have done more playtesting, because I was really fearing that this game wouldn't be coherent, that it would just be a mess in the end. And at some point you just can't tell. You've been working on it for so long, you don't even see a game anymore, and you've already tested all these things so much that you don't really derive any fun from it. So you don't even see it as a game anymore. It's a really surreal experience. I don't know, maybe some of you can relate. Please tell me if you can. Probably one of the biggest reasons why this game was completed was because I would set deadlines, even like smaller scaled ones. Like with long-term projects, you often get carried away. You think, I have basically an infinite amount of time, I can just take as long as I want on this, but with that kind of mindset you'll never get anything done. So I would like create deadlines for reaching certain milestones, finishing certain levels, and even completing the game as a whole. And this also ties into one of my biggest problems with this game was definitely scope creep. Most of the features you see in the game now were never supposed to be in there. I just thought of a feature, I implemented it in the moment. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. So if this game really kept its scope from the beginning, I could have finished it by late December of 2020, which was the initial deadline, but I just kept expanding it, and I barely get it finished by August of 2022. In fact, if I could, I would have still kept going. I would have added more enemies, I would have added more features, but I just couldn't have justified it at that point. I've already spent 2 years on this, and at some point you reach the point where you just stop learning, so yeah, it just wasn't worth it for me. And as many of these things go, I probably never would have finished this if I wouldn't have set a concrete deadline. You know, this destructive perfectionism. Like, if I wanted to sound sophisticated, I would say, art is never finished, only abandoned. But looking at it now, I definitely had to cut some corners, but that's just how it is with these kinds of games. Like, I was constantly thinking, should I keep working on this for a couple of years and make the perfect game? Or should I just finish it now, you know, jog to the finish line, release it, and that's it? I kind of chose a mix of the two. I set a deadline in the future, I said like 3 months, and I released this game. So I procrastinated through the first month, I started working in the second, and I absolutely cared for my health in the third one. So this is also why you should be making smaller scale deadlines. The last couple of weeks were pretty tough, as you would expect. I had to plan out every single day and assign a workload to that specific day, which did end up working pretty well, but you know how in game development you usually do the most fun things at the beginning? Yeah, that was also a huge issue, because at in the end I only really had the really technical and uninteresting stuff to finish. So these last couple of weeks were a real drag. They felt much longer than they actually were. You should make the most important things first, not the most fun things. I pushed sound effects to the very end because that's not really something that's really my cup of tea. So that was one of the last things I did, and it was also... But the sound effects actually weren't that bad. I got to smash a lot of bottles and destroy things, so I tried to record my sound effects, which was maybe a bit too ambitious considering how little time I had left. But there are some good impact sound effects I used. I did end up using a lot of sound library sound effects to save time. I think it turned out pretty well. I initially used SFXR, which you can use to generate sound effects, but that kind of sounded uninspired, so I can only encourage you use like realistic sound effects, because it fits in surprisingly well. Like, it's a pixel art game, but somehow like these realistic gunshot sound effects don't feel out of place. Another thing that greatly helped me was making my own tools for my game. I added a developer console which I could use to spawn things to teleport the player, which greatly helped in playtesting. It's also a lot of fun to use spawn things to use. And also the level editor. But there were also a lot of things which were supposed to be in the game from the beginning, but I never implemented. I'll just go through these rapid fire. I was intending to add another shopkeeper, so you would have 3 in total. I wanted to add mines as one of the like 5 active items you would have. I didn't want to add any more. I didn't want to add 85 ragdolls, random damage, which you kind of have with the melee attack. You can get critical hits which do like 4 times the amount of damage, I think. Statistics screen, which I just relegated to a small line of text in the character creator. A tutorial. I think the game explains itself pretty much. I think it's better if you... room modifiers, kind of like Enter the Gungeon's hard mode, but that would have been I'm not sure if it would really flow with the gameplay. Dialogue. This game doesn't have much story. It's about an idiot astronaut doing astronaut things. So I didn't really feel like I had to add lore. Double rooms, kind of like in The Binding of Isaac, but that's one of those things I was too stupid to add it in the beginning, and later on it was just all the systems were so rigid and set in place I couldn't add it at that point, so that never happened. Fire modes, I think this one is pretty unnecessary. This isn't Armor 3. More level themes. Yeah, you do end up hearing the level 1 theme a lot. Like, I'm not sure if you go insane listening to it. I haven't asked the people who played this game a lot. But Spelunky does something similar, where the earlier levels have a lot more themes than the later ones. So there's a little bit more variety for your ears. more challenge rooms. I did want to add another challenge room where you can like race this RC car around the racetrack, and if you win, you get the teleporter to the secret room. But that was like in the last 2 weeks, so that didn't come to fruition. I just didn't have enough inspiration to add new content at that time. I was just dead inside. Let's go on with cut content. There's a lot to cover here. Level structure minigame. You weren't supposed to access the level 4 by normal means. You were supposed to get a key and open a secret door in the 3rd level to reach it. So it will kind of be like the Hell Layer and Spelunky. A lot of inspiration from Spelunky, if you notice. But I did put a lot of effort into level 4, and it would be a shame if only like 0.1% of players actually went there. Like, I don't know what Derek E was thinking. I just didn't want to. I just wanted as many people as possible to see that level. I thought it was pretty cool. Modifiers. I cut these out pretty late in development. You could choose a combination of like a skin, activate a modifier, and you would get a special mode, like blind mode, which would make everything much darker, or hard mode, which would only give you 1 item slot and 1 HP. But those kind of clash with all the items in the game, were hard to keep track of, and just too much of a workload. Some of them are still in the code, but I'm pretty sure they're broken in the current version if you were to activate them. Maybe I'll just make paid DLC where I'll flip this switch from off to on. The 4th boss was initially able to take your guns and shoot you with them, but that I couldn't make that work smoothly, especially with the 85 items in the game. The Ice Frog. The Star Nafix. This was a pretty big one. There was a Nafix for swords which would let you stun enemies, but it was really uninteresting. You just make them like jitter in place, and that's about it. So it would kind of just relegate every single fight to hitting an enemy over and over again without really having to dodge. Touch support. This game was supposed to be on the Google Play Store, but it's not really a great way to play the game, and a lot of the items aren't really designed for it in mind. Also, performance would be horrible. The only reason I added this so early on in development is just so I could show it to more people, but most of them would just walk away or ask, what are you doing in my house? Also these spike blocks, which were just crush traps from Spelunky, and rolling spike balls, which just rolled around and spiked. The release actually went pretty smoothly, by which I mean I was up until 6 AM, my resting heart rate was at 100 and I was sweating the whole time. At that point I thought this game was done, but that of course wasn't the case. I updated it for a solid month, which I kinda had to, like bugs popped up, some people didn't like certain features, so I changed a lot of things around. Initial reception was actually pretty negative, probably because of how frustrating the game is and how unconventional its pacing is. There's also a lot of constructive criticism. Of course, the game is far from perfect, but a lot of people just didn't have the patience to stick around with the game, and they just wrote it off as too difficult or bad. The people who actually liked the game, like the target audience of this game, they did actually surface a couple of weeks later, so that was definitely a relief to see that I didn't just make this game for myself. And that kind of brings us to where we are now. Overall, I couldn't be happier with how this game turned out, but I definitely should have done more planning, more playtesting, and you should definitely put your own health above your game project. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please tell me if you like this format. I may make more videos like it. Thanks for watching, see ya.